Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. We talk a lot about the phone scammers, the people who call you. They've got spoofed IDs on the phone, and they make up all kinds of stories, and they're often claiming that you owe the FBI money or you're about to get arrested because of the IRS. Or sometimes they'll actually pose as a company that you do business with and try to rip you off that way. And someone sent me a story, and I apologize, I could be mispronouncing the name, but Maciej, 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 Magic, I don't know. I apologize, but someone sent me the story from the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation or company, but it's CBC Radio. Tech law expert nearly duped by very, very clever phone scam. So this is a guy who works in tech who came out and admitted that he almost got ripped off, and he was surprised by how far even he was suckered into something because somebody had just simply figured out a few things that they could twist and turn around a little bit. So the guy's name is Peter Gunst, and he is openly telling the story, even though he is a technology lawyer. Gunst is the founder and CEO of Legal.io, which helps corporations and state bar associations make better use of technology and talent. The sophisticated scam went viral after Gunst shared his story in a Twitter thread. And Carol Off of As It Happens, Canada, spoke to Gunst about his story and interviewed him, and I'm going to just kind of skip through the interview and try to hit the nuts and bolts of it. But he said that he got a phone call at his office from somebody who said, "Hey, I'm calling from your bank." And they said, "We think there's been an attempted fraud on your bank account." Now, here's the thing. Fraud phone calls like that do come in from banks. I've gotten called by my bank before and said, "Hey, Steve, I mentioned before I went to New York earlier this summer, and at one point in time my bank called me and said, 'Steve, we got a bunch of funny uses of your debit card in Canada and New York. Was that you?' And I said, 'Yes, it was.' And they read them off to me. I said, 'Yep, that was me, that was me, that was me.' And they said, 'Thank you very much.' And that was the end of it. And I'm glad they called me. But in this case, they called Mr. Gunst and said, 'Hey, this is your bank speaking. It looks like there's been a fraud attempt on your account.' So he didn't think that was unusual, but he does say, 'I think one thing I learned is that if you're not super vigilant, you're really deep into other things, you get a phone call like that, it can be quite startling.' And that's one of the things you're counting on, is that you're not expecting the phone call, much like the Spanish Inquisition. And so when they call you, you're not on guard. The phone rings, you pick it up, and somebody fires something at you from left field. So they said, 'Someone tried to take $50 out of an ATM in Florida. Was this you?' And he said, 'Of course, it wasn't me.' So I told him that. They said, 'Well, we've blocked this transaction, and we want to do some other things to up the security of your account. Can you please confirm the member number that you have with the bank?' Now, here's the tricky part. They asked him to confirm something, which should have been a warning flag because the bank should know who he is. They just called him. But his thought was, well, the number I have with the bank is not a password. It's simply an ID number of a sort that they gave him, almost like a username. And he thought, well, the bank would have that, but if I give that to somebody else, it still wouldn't allow them to hack my account. So he gave it to them. So he says not every bank has a username, but it is a unique identifier. He goes, it should have rung alarm bells, but it didn't. So he said, well, okay, if they do need to verify me, I guess it's okay. So he gave him the number. But he did not give them any passwords. But here's the problem. Once they have that number, someone else can try logging into your account with the wrong password, and then what will happen is it will generate automatically a thing that says, would you like to reset your password? Your password is wrong. And then the bank will send the new password setting information to the cell phone that's associated with the account. Knowing this, the bad guys then said, we're going to verify your identity by sending a verification code to your cell phone. They said they were going to do this. And so what happened is they tried his account 3 times. It said, would you like a new password? They said yes, and it sent the verification code to his cell phone. So this is the tricky part. So they then pretended that they go, well, we just sent you a new password. Have you gotten it yet? And he said that he then read it out to them. And of course, that allowed them to reset his password, and now they can get into his account. So here's the deal. They got access to his account, but apparently they still could not do transactions on the account without more information. And so then they said, we want to now verify some other transactions. And now that they can read his account, they can sit there and verify all these real transactions. And he's saying, yes, those are real transactions. And so at this point in time, he's still thinking this could be his bank. So they now said, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to block your PIN number on your debit cards. Can you please provide us the information so we can block future transactions? And at this point, he realized, wait a second, they don't need my PIN number if they've just generated a new password and all this other stuff. He realized it wasn't a legitimate phone call. So he said, you know something? If this is really how you guys operate, your bank needs to update its procedures, but I'm not giving you this number. And at that point, they started asserting authority, saying, you're on a recorded line. We're not going to be able to block this transaction if you don't give us this number. And they upped the aggressiveness of the call. Because at which point I terminated it and called the fraud department. And so he admits at this moment in time, he still wasn't 100% sure that he was being defrauded. He wasn't even sure. But when he called the bank, they said, no, that's a scam. It's obviously a scam. So here's the deal. When someone calls you, I don't care why they're calling you. Someone calls you, and it's an important phone call, and you have 1% thought that it could be fake. Say, you know something, can I call you back? And if they say no, go, wait, what's the difference if I initiate the phone call or if you initiate the phone call? If I'm talking to you right now, I should be able to hang up the phone and call you right back. I have to go to the bathroom. So someone else is buzzing in. My kitchen's on fire. The idea that they will not let you call them back is the thing that will indicate to you that it's a fraud. Now, you might say, Steve, what if you say, I'll call you back, and you call them back at their number? No, you don't do that. Let's suppose you bank with Bank of America. And I'm simply choosing them because it's an easy one to remember, and everyone's heard of Bank of America, okay? Let's suppose you bank with Bank of America. And Bank of America calls you, apparently, and you look down, the caller ID says, Bank of America Fraud Department. And you pick the phone up and they say, is this Steve Lehto? Let's suppose they know your name. Is this Steve Lehto? Yes, it is. We have a problem with one of your bank accounts. I say, oh, which one? And they have some information. You know what I say? Can I call you back? They'll say, yes, here's the phone number. You can write that number down if you want. Hang up the phone, but log on to the internet and look at bankofamerica.com, get their phone number, and call that number back. And say, I just got a phone call from somebody in this department with this phone number, this name, and they said that they want to talk to me about fraud. Does that make sense to you? Because if it does make sense, then they should be able to route you to the correct person, but you know who you've called. When someone calls you nowadays, unless it's your best friend whose voice you recognize on a clear connection. And even now, some guys are going to comment and say, Steve, they can do deep fakes and fake that. They probably can. But the point is that right now, I can call up my brother and say, Dave, this is Steve. And if he said, prove it, I'm going to say, Dave, you and I shared a room together for 5 years when I was in junior high and you're in high school. Let me explain some things that only I would know from living in that room. And 30 seconds later, he'd say, yep, Steve, it's you. Go right ahead. What can you tell me? Okay? And if my brother Dave called me and said, Steve, this is Dave. It's an emergency. And I don't recognize the number. And I go, dude, I don't know if this is you. Prove it. Trust me. In 30 seconds, he can identify himself. But other than those people whose voices you recognize and who actually know enough information that no one else could know, other than that, when someone calls you on the phone and you have the slightest inkling that something could be wrong because they ask you for a PIN number, social security number, address, mother's maiden name, middle name, anything they ask you, if it makes you nervous, say, excuse me, I want to call you back. And they should let you call them back if they're legitimate because they have a phone if they're legitimate and they have a number which is legitimate and you can call them on that number and speak to them on the phone if it's legitimate. So you say, I'm going to call you back. Write down the number they gave you, but don't call that number back. Call the number on the internet. And by the way, you can usually take the number they gave you, stick it into Google, and watch what pops up. You'll get all kinds of fraud alerts. This is a scam. This is a fake phone number. This is a phishing scheme. Phishing, phishing scheme. Not after the band fish, but just after the concept of people trying to get stuff from you through these illegitimate means, okay? So you can do that. And that would eliminate 99.99999% of all these scams, okay? So the point is, if they call you, if they're trying to sell you something, you don't need it, And if they want your information, you don't have to give it to them. And the odds of an authentic, legitimate person you do business with actually calling you and needing that kind of information from you is so slim, but you can rule it all out by saying, let me call you back. Hang up, call the number that you found on their legitimate website, and see if these people are real. And you'll find out they almost never are. Almost never. So there you go. But I do admire Mr. Gunst for stepping up and saying, hey, look what happened to me. They actually got me halfway through the ringer before I figured out what was happening. So that's a great thing. I'm glad he stepped up and did this. I'm glad that CBC wrote the article and broadcast as well. I'm glad that Masij, or however he pronounces his name, sent me the story. And I apologize for mispronouncing it. I feel bad, but that's the best I can do. So there you go. Questions or comments, put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.